Hi. So you already introduced me. I'm Sander. Actually, I was supposed to be here with two people. The other guy is Marcel over there, and he was lurking in the corner, but he woke up ill. So I'm going to do it by myself, which means that part of the presentation will be slightly out of my comfort zone. But I think, well, at least I'm going to try to make it so that you don't even notice. We're teletext.io or Instant, and I'll explain you later why the name is sort of confusing. But we are an entirely serverless startup, and today I will share with you the story of how it came to be and why we chose for a serverless stack. So this is Marcel and me. Coincidentally, well, not really coincidentally, we're wearing the same kind of clothes. There was sort of a joke in a previous company that we worked together where we had Aubergine Wednesday every week, so everybody would wear the same color. Anyway, we go back a long way. For about 10 years, we've been working in several startups. The first where we actually met was Album Printer, which is a photo book provider, and it was acquired by Vistaprint in 2010. After that, we started Picho, which is a platform for printing customized products from several websites. And we worked together on My Tomorrows as well. And My Tomorrows is a medical startup, something entirely different. But since we worked at several startups together, we experienced the same problems over and over again. So especially at Picho and My Tomorrows, which were the last two startups, we had sort of a similar stack. We used React on top of a platform with an API, and we always encountered the same problems. You build a custom-built software piece, in React this case, you deploy it as quickly as you can, because time to market is important, and then you never worry about content management, and then that means you know it up front, but still it's going to happen, that at some point a marketer will be at your desk requesting for text changes or translations or that kind of stuff. Like next week we want to have a German version of the app, is that possible? Well, technically, yes, we could do that for them, but in practice, it's actually a lot of work. And since My Tomorrows uses Ruby, a Ruby backend, and Picho, a Java backend, to do it on the backend would mean that we have to do it twice. So we reckoned that it would be more beneficial to build a single service that you could just drop in the front end instead. So essentially, to scratch our own itch, we decided to build a drop-in content management tool, and that was actually the birth of our startup. One of the things we really wanted to do was to minimize the amount of programming to install it, and of course it shouldn't cost us anything because it was really meant as a company. And then how did we think about serverless? Well, the initial choice for serverless wasn't all that grand, because it was 2015. Lambda had just been released by Amazon. Wasn't all that well known, but we're a bit, we like sort of restrictions, because if you set some rules for yourself, then you become more creative. So we kind of like that stuff, and it's more fun that way. So, for example, at Picho, we had a product owner, and he had the tendency to put stories in a running sprint, like an ongoing sprint. So you're 1 week working, and the next week you have to deliver, and then he pushes in a new story. Everybody hates that, right? So we wanted to be flexible, so we allowed him to do that. But then we said, okay, you can do that, but only if you do 50 push-ups. And this really worked in the beginning because he used it wisely, right? So he only chose like the really important stories. But at some point, he just became really good at push-ups. So then we stopped that. Another thing is, and that's a picture over there, because this actually happened. It was a bit of a joke, but it actually worked quite well. At stand-up meetings with developers, everybody was talking like through each other, right? It was like very chaotic. So we implemented sort of the same rule. We said, okay, you can say anything you want at any time you want. I don't care. You can talk through to each other, interrupt. It doesn't really matter. But you can only do this while dancing. That worked great until we discovered that this guy, who was the lead developer, was actually a semi-professional rock and roll dancer. I kid you not. So at some point, he was the only guy talking all the time, so that was a bit confusing. But anyway, at Instant, or Teletext at that point, we figured that the rule would be no servers. And we defined no servers as nothing that actually has an operating system that we have to maintain. So it may have an operating system, but it may also maybe have, 20 the Chinese people typing stuff, fine, doesn't matter. As long as we don't know about it, that's fine. And also, the other part of the definition is, it shouldn't be anything that we would need to actively scale, right? So I don't want to think about scaling, I don't want to think about maintenance. So that was the rule. So, at that point, which is like June 2015, we, of course, because it was a hobby project, we chose the coolest things, which was, for example, Google Material Design Lite for our website. We used React, which we also thought was cool. Then we looked at Lambda specifically. It was super new. So we really loved it. So we built it in the weekends and in the nights, and then we deployed it for both Picho and My Tomorrows. It worked great. But of course, you're sort of proud of it, right? So we started talking to fellow developers, and they all have the same problem. So they wanted it too. So then we decided to put a website on top, and we thought it was funny to refer to this old technology, teletext, the old school thing with the television that pushes from a central hub content to many screens. But that was what we were doing. So we were like, oh yeah, we're going to name ourselves teletext. We didn't really think about the implications of that, but I'll come to that later. So from that point, everybody could just subscribe and use it. No money involved, nothing. It was no problem. Then we spoke with Todd Hoff, who owns like highscalability.com. I don't know if you know this blog, but this is an architecture blog in the United States, and it usually writes about architectures of Twitter and YouTube and all these like big companies. And we know him because we've been writing for him before at the other startups. And then we discussed it, and he said it would be really nice to write a blog post about your serverless approach. And so we did. So we wrote this blog post about teletext.io with the somewhat, well, okay, I'm hesitating a bit, but that's because of the next slide. Because we wrote this article, and it was a little bit provocative. So we discussed what our article was like, what our architecture was like, and then we explained, why we did that because of cost and flexibility, blah blah blah. And then this happened. Essentially, all hell broke loose. These are just some clippings from Reddit, like from a discussion forum. And I haven't been reading this out loud, so I know you can also read this, but I just like to read it out loud. People say things like, aha, the cloud doesn't have an operating system. The cloud doesn't have hardware. It's just a bunch of magical pixie dust that automatically serves our content. Woo! This is not a real startup. It's not a real company. It's the modern-day equivalent of a drug front laundering money. In fact, this seems a lot more like a pyramid scheme, to be honest. That was really cool. Like the best days of my life, seriously. We didn't even do this, right? This just happened. And this is only Reddit because the same stuff was going on Twitter and everywhere else. And essentially, it was DevOps people fighting cloud people over this. And we were sort of the collateral thing in the middle. This was great fun. It's still up there because the Reddit doesn't ever delete anything. So if you look for teletext.io, you can actually find the entire thread. It's a couple of meters of people throwing shit at each other. Anyway, it did help us a little because, of course, when stuff like this happens, the big guys, they read this, the journalists and stuff who do research. So a couple of big internet papers picked it up and wrote articles about us. That was, of course, fun. But it got even better because then our friend Werner Vogels, the CTO of Amazon, wrote his, in December of 2015, he wrote his predictions for 2016. And it was like a lot of talk about enterprise stuff, which is sort of relatively boring. And then in the end, he said, oh yeah, and there's also this great startup from the Netherlands that you should really pay attention to, and so on and so forth. However, we were just a website. We didn't have a company. So, and that was fine because it was just a tool that we shared with people, right? I mean, it wasn't really meant to be generating money or anything. But then some legal friend of ours said, it's really better if you start a company. Why? Because if you serve content to the amount of customers that you've attracted through the Fuzz thing, which was about 400 customers, and if you guys go down, And I was like, no, we're not, because we're serverless. We never go down. But you know, let's assume for a minute that you do, then you're personally liable, unless you start a company. So then we stepped on our bikes and we cycled to essentially a squatted parking spot where we met the cheapest notary of the Netherlands, and we started a company. When we were cycling back home, something else happened. That was actually the same day. It was quite the thing. This guy was calling us. You know who this guy is? Probably not. It's Oscar Kneppers. He's the CEO of Rockstar Incubator, which is the largest accelerator or incubator in Amsterdam. They do probably 20, 30, 40, 50 startups a year. They're sort of a small-time Y Combinator. And he called us and he said, well, tonight the submission is closing for startups in the new web and mobile program this summer. If you're quick, you can still submit. And so we did. Sure, why not? And of course, we were selected, and we went into Rockstar Accelerator. But I had a job, of course, at My Tomorrows, which was the pharma company. And Marcel, he was a successful freelancer, so he's also making money. So, oh shit, what to do now? Well, Marcel decided to hop in full-time into Rockstar, and I participated in the weekends like I've been doing before. Now I'm going to show you something about the product. I'll first show you the result of what it actually does, and then I'll show you the architecture. This is also the part that's a bit out of my comfort zone, but hey, sometimes life makes it that way, right? This is our product. What it essentially does is if you put a script in any website, you can use a magic key combination or add #edit to the URL, in this case the serverless conference website, and then this little button over there will appear, which allows you to log in on your own website, and then you can essentially change text. If you then publish it, it's persistent and globally available, and you know, it's just content management features, but with a single line of script. That's what we do. The architecture. This is not our architecture. This is a traditional architecture, right? So if you have 0 customers and you want to build something, this is more or less what you'll have to do. You need some DNS, you need a content delivery network, you need a load balancer, at least 2 EC2 instances, and some database thing. This will cost you approximately $100 a month, right? For nothing. You have no, you don't even have customers. But if you don't have this, then you have no website, so you'll never get any, right? We wanted something else. We wanted something that costs $0 a month if we had no customers, because it was a hobby project to begin with, so we weren't planning on making any money with it, which means that it shouldn't cost us anything. This is our architecture. What we do, it's divided into 2 parts. The upper part is the part where you edit stuff from within your browser. It means when you change the text, the edit request gets sent to the API gateway, a Lambda fires, and it stores the draft into DynamoDB. Well, it does a lot more than that, but that's the simplest explanation. If you then decide to publish stuff, we publish it into the other part, which is S3 and CloudFront, as static files. So the data we store as static files. Why? Because it should never go down. Because at runtime, you cannot miss out on any content if something breaks, right? So it has to be as static as we can. And of course, then if you log out on your website and just view it in any browser or as any person, you get content served as flat JSON files through CloudFront, and the little script just renders it into your website using hashed versions of your original text as keys. It's a fairly simple model. And it's actually super scalable because the S3 and CloudFront solution for the runtime data serving is not going to crack. If we don't fuck up the data or the front-end script, because that will be the 2 potential caveats, it's not going to crack. The running parts are only in the Lambda. And that's only at editing time. And you know, if temporarily that would go down, that wouldn't be like a major disaster, because you know, it doesn't actually affect your live website. The benefits for us were that it didn't cost any money when it doesn't have customers. The only money involved is directly proportional to the amount of customers that you serve. And the largest money gain sits not in the cost of the compute, because you could say that, you know, once you scale up and you have like 1,000, 2,000, 1 million users, you will have to pay for the compute, right? The Lambda also costs money, and that's sort of the same as you would build it with EC2. But there's a lot less of maintenance. There's no operating systems to maintain. There's no security patches for port scanning that you need to apply. It's all, well, simply not there. The other part, which is relating to our definition of serverless, is that scaling is part of the stack. I don't have to think of auto-scaling rules or anything. It just scales in parallel. It executes in parallel, right? So if we do 1 million customers at the same time, then 1 million lambdas will fire in, batched up in their little containers, but okay. But still, it will scale automatically. We don't really have to think about that. Also, this also relates to our love for restriction. The model by itself, it forces us to think in microservices, to keep stuff small, because lambdas have to be small. You cannot, like Paul, the previous presenter, explained, you cannot put a shitload of stuff into a single lambda, or that would be stupid. There's, of course, downsides. I won't be telling you a lot about this, because there's many people who have already mentioned this. Logging and debugging is very, very hard, because error messages and stuff, they get mixed up with all sorts of other logging reports. And of course, if you have to work with multiple people together, like with a larger group of people, you'll have some trouble if you work on the same lambda concurrently, because it doesn't really work very well. And there's no offline possibility for development, so you cannot really run lambdas on your own machine, which is a little bit of a bitch. This is just a little thing we thought would be interesting for you, because the previous presenter, again, Paul, he was referring to his love for Cognito. And this is how we started. We used Cognito also to make only Google work. So we had a Google login, so you could log in with your Google account on your own website. And we used Cognito for that. And the problem with Cognito is that you have to do stuff on 3 occasions. You have to make sure that you can get the token from Google, which is like custom programming that you have to do. You have to make sure that Cognito works with IAM properly. And then when everything is working, you have to build in a Lambda some way to validate that the token is actually valid and not somebody screwing with your login procedure. This is actually fine. It works if you have only one provider, but if you want more, you have to do all that 3 times in this case, or maybe 4 or 5, depending on how many providers you want. So this is like a nice model, but it's just a lot of work. Luckily, there's people solving that, because then we decided to use Auth0, which works slightly differently. It ties directly into IAM, and it actually hides all the connections with all the providers that you want to use. So you'll have to only make sure that you connect to Auth0 itself and do the token check, but only once, because you only have to do that with Auth0 and not with the separate providers. And then you get like connections to all the providers that you want, and you can do free-form user password combinations as well. And they even do stuff like I forgot my password, or can I change my password, please, which you normally would have to program yourself. And since you have to program that for every single application that you're doing, that you're releasing, it's actually quite boring work. So I prefer to use a service for that. Well, this is also interesting. Usually I leave this one out and then throw it in as the big thing, but this was supposed to be super cheap. So we currently have about between 1,000 and 2,000 customers using it more or less actively. And there's a couple of very big sites. I won't. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention their names, but at least our own companies are using it, but also some websites that are a fairly bit bigger. So we're having quite a lot of data, but all together, since we're way in the free tiers of everything, it's super cheap. What is interesting, though, is that because we're using static files at runtime, that the biggest cost is, well, almost the biggest cost is the CDN, of course, because it's serving all the data. And also storage is a big chunk. But lambdas, for example, because we only use them for simple operations, they hardly cost anything. I mean, we put them at 2%, but it's actually less. So it's not what we expected, actually, but that's interesting. And this we can do for a long time, you know, without, you know, probably if we would have 1 million customers with maybe 1% of them paying, easy. So, what happened after Rockstar? Because it ended in September, we changed the name. Why? Actually, for 2 reasons. The official reason is the one that's over there. You know, officially our technology worked in such a way that programmers had to put labels in HTML code, and all the elements that you labeled, you could edit as a marketer. So that kind of makes sense, right? I mean, for us, we're programmers, so for us that worked. But then we found out that we could also do this by just putting in only the script and forget about the labels, and it would just work like Optimizely does, or other A/B testing tools. They use the same kind of technology to make it work instantly. So that sort of shifted our audience from developers to digital marketers, because now they can do it themselves. So we noticed that the digital marketers, they don't really have a thing for geeky puns to old technology. So they were like, yeah, but it's with television. It's with television, man. So we got fed up with explaining this, so we decided to change the name. But the unofficial reason is that there's a company, and that's called Teletext. It's called teletext.com. I think they're English, and they are probably, I think they're also the license holders of the ancient technology, which is fine because it's a homage. But what they do now, I think, is they are in the business of renting out hotel rooms and cars. No kidding. I mean, that's pivoting. But yeah, but they're actually well known for the trademark infringement cases. So we avoided that by changing our name. So we changed the name to Instant. Domain name instant.cm, which also funny is Cameroon actually, but with us it's content management, of course. And the other major thing that happened is that, of course, we decided to make it into a real company, to start making, you know, try to make money out of it and scale it to you know, make it big. And for that, we needed some money, right? Funding. Well, you can for funding you can do many things. You can do friends and family. You can maybe try to pitch for angels. You can even do VCs. I mean, there's some VCs who do seed. And we have quite a lot of experience with that because we had multiple investment rounds in other companies. But actually, this experience was the reason that we decided to do it differently. So what we did, we made a large list of all developers in Amsterdam that we knew, and then we sent them an invite in which we asked, would you like to participate in our peer fund? And the peer fund is actually like a small company that owns shares in our company. Which means they all have a part of our company, and we get money. It was only small amounts of money, so it's like semi-crowdfunding, but with specific people. Because the idea was that we didn't have just shareholders, but also a large group of evangelists, and the people in the peer fund all have access to the actual source code. So if you invest in Instant, you actually can become a contributor to what we do, which we thought was nice. It's closed 2 weeks ago, and we managed to get 275,000 euros in the peer fund, so it kind of works, which gives us some runway to the end of 2017, and probably longer if we actually start gathering paid customers. So that went really well. This is sort of the end of what I wanted to speak with you, because I ended that today. If you have any questions, feel free. If you want to be super nice to us, which is always possible, I would like to invite you to become a customer, of course. And if you want to be really super nice, you can go to this URL and support our Thunderclap campaign, because we'll be at Product Hunt in 4 next Wednesday. Very soon, and we can use all the support that we can get. So feel free to be nice. Thank you. You're asking, I'm repeating it so everybody else can hear it, but you're asking to the number of paid customers, right?
Page views.
Page views. Pooh. I don't know. Marcel, do you know that? Right. Yeah. So I'll repeat what he says, but it's over 30 gigabytes per month in data right now. Still early days, but since it's only static data, we don't really care. We measure the data, essentially the number of requests, which is not exactly the same as page views, because we also. Yeah. Also, I don't know that, but you know, it's only small pieces of content. So if you typically a resource file contains like maybe 8 or 9 keys with like a little string in it, and so if you would shrink that, that's one request, and then if you divide 30 gigabyte by that thing, and it's probably like 1K, you know, so then you can do the math. But it's about 1,500 customers right now using it. And we're growing with about 10, 20 websites a day. So it's going well. Traction is sort of starting.
You started this on Sunday, it sounded like. Things that I've done started on the Sunday. Later on, I think there's tools I'd like to change or tools I'd like to add, or technologies I'd like to change or technologies I'd like to add. Where are you on that?
Well, we changed details. Like we just added the Auth0 tool set for the base parts of our stack. Oh, did anybody hear the question, by the way? That's maybe good. You were mentioning that for hobby projects, this gentleman here, he tends to do a lot of those projects, and it happens often that he wants to change parts of his stack afterwards, or that he feels like I should have maybe used something else. And he was asking if I have the same. Well, for some parts, but luckily not for like the base part. But I must say that we're quite used to working with AWS. So, for example, Album Printer, which was the first company we worked on, was launching customer for EC2 in Europe, which is like 10 years ago. Picho was a technology partner from the beginning, which is like 2010 or so. So we're really used to working with AWS. So the AWS parts are, pretty much working as we expected. And it's more like the surrounding services that we tend to change. So like support services for customer engagement or stuff like that. But not the real stack, because it's quite solid.
Do you still use Cognito with Auth0, or did it completely replace that?
I think we completely replaced that, but I'm looking at Marcel now. Yes, he nods. We completely replaced Cognito by Auth0. And so far, but that's like 3 weeks ago. But so far it's working well, because it gives us more, because some people didn't want to use a Google account, and we didn't want to spend the time to do it with Cognito, and now we get more customers. So it's working quite well. Our conversion is better. Questions? Okay. Well then, thank you for your attention, and I hope to speak to you later.